Brilliant. Yeah, and sorry for the great. Yeah. So we're going to be recording the session as well. So if there's any, good tidbits that you like to listen to, or if you want to share this with some of your colleagues as well, we'll be sure to send out that link shortly afterwards. And sorry for the delay, folks. And knowing product managers, I'm sure that everybody is multitasking anyways on the back end. So let's get this kicked off. Okay, so let's see if I can share my screen here. Just bear with me for 2 seconds. I'm sure you don't want to read all my emails. Okay. Yeah. No. Yeah. Okay, let's do this. What? Okay. Sorry, 1 second. A lot of technical issues going on today. I think I have this figured out by now. Not that one. Where are you hiding? There it is. Well, when it rains, it pours. When you have technical issues, for some reason, it just kind of pours on the one day. There we go. Okay, view. Oh, I haven't run into this before. Okay. Full screen mode. Let's do this. Okay, can you see my screen okay, Andre?
No.
No, we still see the panel of the participants.
Okay, how about now?
Yes.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, we're here. All right. Okay, so thanks for joining everybody today. So I'm your presenter, Scott Miller. I've been doing pricing now for well over 20 years. I've been doing it in the capacity of being a consultant, but also I've been the director of global pricing for a variety of different IT tech organizations as well. I love pricing. Pricing is my passion, and what I found over the years is the more that I do pricing, the more I realize that you got to really lock arms very closely with the product management teams. And even in today's world, pricing often falls under as a responsibility for product teams as well. And so I've had the pleasure of working for some really interesting technology firms, and pretty much as the main kind of pricer for the organization, I would sit right beside the product folks. And so I've kind of been pulled into this world of product and product design, and I love it because we live in this era of what we're calling the digital era these days. So just in terms of background, I've probably done well over 100 different pricing and offer design and commercialization initiatives. And this is kind of what's brought a lot of my passion around best practices. I know what works, what doesn't work, and the best approach that we can take that really helps drive success within your organizations. And so I've got 3 goals for today. The first one is, let's just talk a little bit about being the B2B digital product manager, and a high-level overview of various innovative market trends that are happening. Then we're going to talk about an introduction to some best practice digital design, or what I call the digital pricing framework. And then the third goal here is I want to make sure that you've got some tools that you can take back to your own organization. So we're going to have some pricing tools that I'm going to show, along with some case study examples that you can take back to your own organizations. So before we get started, I always like to start off with this quote, and this was from Mark Andreessen. He was a Netscape founder. Some of you, hopefully, you're old enough to remember what Netscape was, one of the early internet browsers. But he came up with this quote that I thought was really interesting. He just said, the future technology value creation is really going to be driven by the rapidly changing world of software-enabled systems. And so just think about everything that we have, even as consumers, not just in B2B, but consumers. It's almost like everything that we buy has some integration with some aspect of digital or software integration within it. Just even think about, treadmills at the gym these days. There's treadmills are hooked up to some cloud where it'll track how you're doing and your progress. The more advanced ones are connected to TV systems and all that. Think about cars, and the car itself is now, being fully integrated with software to the point where there's semi-autonomous, and 5 more years from now, it's going to be fully autonomous. So our world's changing, and I like to say, the digital era we talked a lot about in the past, but we're here, and the innovation we're seeing within a lot of organizations is really exciting. And so that means that our world as product managers has really expanded. And I really feel that the digital era product manager these days are the corporate superstars. I mean, traditionally in the past, as a product manager managing hardware, there's a lot of best practices that you had when you had to think about, management of hardware. But you bring in this aspect of software, and software is not linear like hardware. It's ever changing. You need to be managing different versions and whatnot. And I just find that the product managers, we have to really know how to, I call it the conductors, right? Your company is the orchestra and you're the conductor, and you have to make sure that all the pieces are working together in order to make it a full symphony. So in terms of what's happening out in the marketplace, and I find these kind of 12 key theme or 15 kind of key themes keep coming up in terms of digital transformation. And I'm sure your organization is working on their own digital transformation or coming up with their own major products. But they usually fit into some of these categories here. And what it's done in this world of the digital era is that it's created this requirement for a lot of companies to change perhaps how they've priced historically, especially with cloud. A lot of if you've been with a company that had a lot of legacy enterprise-based software, more than likely you had on-premise type pricing models, but now you're migrating or trying to migrate more to recurring revenue models or SaaS-based pricing models as well. And so what's been happening though is that in terms of the product management community, there's this gap in terms of, how not only do we, need to bring in best practices around software product management, which is where the ISPMA comes into play, but there's also this question of, well, how are we going to price this? How are we going to monetize this? How are we going to contractualize all of our offers going forward to make sure that you can, get the best possible value out of all of these new solutions that your company might be building? And so the other complexity as well, that's what I find much different from hardware, is there's a lot of different monetization tactics. And so when I think of pricing, it's not just, here's a product, I need to know the very specific price point for that product, but it also encompasses what we call monetization strategy and tactics as well. So are there different ways that you can monetize your product to drive growth? And I find that it's really, this is a kind of a good checklist to go through as you're looking at your own software offerings and say, okay, well, we're looking for some growth strategies this upcoming year. Yes, we can try and optimize our pricing, but we're monetizing our product properly enough. And so these 5 key categories for me is let's look at the new acquisition models that we have. Let's look at opportunities that we can upsell from our, with our current customer base. What can we look at cross-selling our products? What about renewals, retention, and win-backs? What's our pricing strategies and monetization strategies for those segments as well? And then there's also various other tactics that you can use. And of course, one of the biggest themes that's coming out right now, especially with a lot of inflationary pressure that's taking place, is price increases. And it's amazing how many companies have not done a price increase to their customers in the last 3 to 5 years. And if you're putting up your hand to say, that's our company, now is a better time than any other to reevaluate that as maybe a tactic for your monetization strategy. So this is a great checklist. In fact, I'd recommend that if you have a chance, we'll be sending the presentation out as well, is print this off and use this as some of your discussions within your own team. So of course, being in the digital era, subscription reigns, right? It's all about subscription. It's all about recurring revenue. There isn't a single CEO that I know of that where, if traditionally there's been a lot of dependency on one-time revenue models and pricing models, they're looking for ways to bring in that recurring subscription going forward. And the reason for this is because it creates this massive, they call it, it's called the stacking effect. You don't have to work as hard to try and every single year getting those one-time deals closed, but with subscription, as you close deals every single year, they start stacking the subscription. They start stacking on top of each other annually, and so what that does is it really drives almost this exponential company valuation growth. And so the two best examples in the industry, of course, is Microsoft and Adobe. Microsoft, they launched their Office 365 subscription back in 2011. And you can see almost after about 5 years, it's almost dramatically gone up exponentially. It's given them this opportunity as well to bring in new products and do regular updates as well. And same with Adobe. Adobe went to subscription way back in 2012. And almost about 3 years, they started seeing that exponential growth, and now look at where they are in the marketplace. And they have attributed almost all of that exponential growth to their capabilities around subscription or the stacking effect of subscription, but it's also allowed them to balloon all of these add-on products as well as a result of that. So the two I have below here is Axon and Trimble. And these ones are interesting because I'm not sure if some of you have within your organization that you sell hardware. Some companies will sell hardware, software, and services. There's a lot of companies that are now looking at those three kind of divisions and saying, well, there's got to be a better way to sell this more as a solution, or let's say hardware as a service approach, as opposed to just selling each of these individually to the customers. So two examples, great examples of hardware as a service is Axon. So 2015, they migrated over to subscription. They completely disrupted their marketplace and became the #1 market shareholder as a result of that. And then Trimble did the same thing, and they did it about recently, but you can see that as soon as they announced that they're going with subscription, their company valuation just went through the roof as well. So let's talk a little bit about some best practices that you can have. And as I mentioned before, with a lot of software product managers, the responsibility of pricing also falls within their domain. And unfortunately, more often than not, a lot of SPMs pay little attention to pricing, and it becomes a secondary kind of, or even a third kind of responsibility in their domain. So more time is spent kind of fighting the day-to-day fire drills of getting the features and the releases out, and less time is spent trying to really understand, the best practices around, well, how should we be pricing, packaging, and monetizing this offering? So let's talk about some best practices that you want to bring to the table here. One approach that I like to show beforehand is, especially if you work with a large global organization, it can take some time, right? One person described it the other day. They feel like, they thought that it'd be a quick and easy thing that they could do and make this change within their company. But you'll see that pricing, again, isn't just figuring a price point. Sometimes it's cultural. So even if you come up with the best pricing structure and offer design structure, you still have to go through this enablement of the company to make sure that everybody understands the pricing and how you link that to the value story. You need to make sure your deals are structured with a process so that you have the desired pricing outcomes as well. And you need to make sure that this culture is really driven around value and ultimately around pricing optimization. So that can take time. It's not like you can change things within a month, especially in a big global organization. So, a good starting point is your own team. And I like to, one approach that you could do is just trying to, build out your own individual team and your department's capabilities and start going from there. And your ultimate goal, what we're trying to do is just make sure that you're trying to increase your own company's level of pricing maturity. And the goal here, what they say is the companies that are at the highest level of pricing maturity are the ones that are driving the highest financial performance as well. So there's a direct link. Like, just imagine the impact of pricing to your top line. And, the better that you become as pricers, the higher the growth that you're going to achieve and the higher the financial performance as well. So, that's why it's important that pricing is considered to be its own discipline. In terms of a best practice framework, this one's called the Digital Pricing Framework, and I've been fine-tuning this one over my entire career, where I've been working both as a consultant with a variety of different consulting firms, but also as director of global pricing for a lot of IT tech companies as well. And so it's allowed me to figure out, okay, what really works, right? You don't want to stay in a theoretical cloud about a framework. You need something that's applicable and actually works within an organization and makes sense. And so my approach has really been around using a value-based approach around offer design. And offer design for me, it's really how do we figure out the right value-based offers to the right clients at the right price. And the approach is really kind of starting high level and bringing it down to ground level. And I'll go through this in a little bit more detail. But once you could have the best pricing and offer design strategy. But if your sales folks or your channel partners don't know how to sell it properly, then it's going to falter. So that's why the next part is really making sure that your whole organization is enabled. And you need to take the time to enable companies. Time and time again, I've seen companies come up with a pricing strategy and they're done and they put it in the market right away. And then it just falters because nobody knows how to sell it properly and they're caught off guard. And even your customers can be caught off guard, especially if it's a very transformational new pricing approach. And the last approach here is all about the execution and just making sure that, every department's going to be somehow impacted by your change to your pricing strategy. And so every department has to be firing on all cylinders. So it's really just you're going to have to be managing a lot of mini projects across each department to make sure that you hit a certain milestone. It's all about managing the deal and bid process as well, because you want to have the right pricing outcomes. And then, of course, you need to monitor, review, and adjust based on the outcomes of what's happening in the marketplace for your new pricing. And so it's this continuous circle. It never ends, right? And it's really funny for me where companies will say, especially software companies will say, we haven't changed our pricing in 5 years. It's like the market changes so fast in the digital era. How do you not have a process in place to keep looking at your pricing models and how you're structured? I mean, there's competitors that are coming in from all over the place with very innovative solutions. So I'm just shocked that in this digital era that there's a lot of, there's cases where some companies haven't touched their pricing for over 5 years. Things change quickly. And so you need a process in place to adjust to that. Let's talk a little bit about offer design. And again, I mentioned it's really about coming up with the right value-based offers to the right segments at the right price. It starts off with high level at the strategy, and then we're going to work to the next level of price value analysis. And what we're trying to do here is articulate the value. Everyone's heard of value-based pricing, easier said than done, but there's some tools that we'll quickly show you here. The goal of price value analysis is to articulate that value and then link that to our pricing. So the third part of this model is coming up with that commercial offer structure. And for those large companies as well, this is where you need to come up with your internal discount matrices as well. And then the last part is the financial analysis. And this is a part where you need to, for a lot of you, now that you have your pricing, your proposed or indicative pricing, what's the business case look like? What's the profit and loss that you're expecting for your small, medium, and large size clients? So the financial analysis part is what the CEOs look for. Are we making money? Are we losing money? If we're losing money in the first couple of years as we make the investment, at what point are we getting an ROI with this investment for whatever innovation that you're working on? And so this is really a value-based pricing process. And so the analogy I like to use, it's all about, skydiving is a great analogy. And I mentioned that, start high level, right? You need to start from the high level and figure out what the strategy is going to be around your for pricing, and as well as your product strategy, your value proposition strategy. Start at the 10,000 foot level. And then we're going to work our way to the 2,000 foot level with price value analysis. This is where you could say, hey, now we know we should be in the range of $280,000 to $400,000 per year for this offering. Of course, that could change based on which segment and their willingness to pay as well. Then we fine tune it and we say, okay, what's that commercial structure? So we want to optimize that offer design or the packaging based on various segmentation requirements. So which segments are you targeting and what are the offers that you want to have targeting those segments? to finalize that commercial price list. So now this is where you can get to a point of say, hey, based on, let's say you have 1,000 users, your price is going to be $325,000 per year. So we're more or less creating our calculator that comes up with your pricing for each of the customer scenarios. And then lastly, I mentioned, this is where we get down to the ground level with our skydiving analogy, is we need to stress test those price models and determine which segments might be profitable, which won't. Sometimes you'll see for software offerings, the small customers, you'll do some P&L around some of the small customer offers. And it's not surprising that, especially for more enterprise software that has a lot of, costly implementation fees and whatnot, that maybe that segment isn't profitable and you need to look at a very low cost to serve software solution to make them profitable. And then the financial analysis piece also involves a lot of, fine tuning that business case that the CEOs want to see as well. Okay, enablement, it's all about preparing, training, and enabling, and then you have to have a program in place to support and reinforce. So if there's any questions coming from your sales channel partners or clients, and then of course, execution part is all about all the departments firing on all cylinders, bid process, monitor, review, and adjust. So most of our focus is really around here on the offer design. And the last part I call the pricing ecosystem. This gets valued in a lot of pricing initiatives, but it's what causes the roadblocks in the end. Every department is impacted by pricing. And so usually what I say, if you're changing your pricing structure internally, there's going to be a lot of mini projects that are going to have to happen within every single department, from contracts to legal, to the technical support team, to your internal sales team, your external sales team, your operations team. I mean, the list goes on. Just think about every department you have in your company. Everyone's going to be impacted by some new pricing structure. So many projects are going to have to kick off. It's pretty much a project plan that you're going to have to do and figure out what everybody has to do from a process, systems perspective and people perspective to hit a certain milestone of when you want to put your new pricing into the market. Okay, I won't go through this part in detail, but again, this is one of those ones printed off. This is kind of peeling back the onion, right? And for offer design, it's a great checklist that you can go through with your team to say, okay, well, what are some of the the key activities and tasks that we need to take on around this best practice? And so strategy has a variety of different considerations that I've found over the years that need to be considered for monetization. Price value analysis. There's 5 key themes that just keep coming up in a lot of my conversations to really understand how pricing is linked to the value story. Commercial structure, again, a lot of checklists for a lot of companies of key considerations, and the same thing with financial analysis. So some of these activities and tasks are going to be more important than others, depending on your company. But you might also be able to use this to identify where you have gaps or where you might be strong as well. Okay, and lastly, so let's talk a little bit about some actual pricing tools that I find that are very useful for doing that price value analysis assessment. And so I'm sure at this stage, we've all heard of the term value-based pricing, and it's really surprising how many software companies still have an over-reliance on cost plus pricing. In fact, I see a lot of cost plus pricing for companies that are traditionally service-based companies, where they do time and materials, and they've been doing that pricing approach for the last 20 years. And then all of a sudden they're creating a lot of new innovative products in today's digital era. And what they're trying to do is do cost plus on software, but software costs change from one year to the next. I mean, your initial years of development, they're going to be through the roof. And so what are you going to do? You're going to price all your customers with this massive development cost in the first year and add your margin. And then what happens in the second year when those development costs really go down? I mean, your costs are going to be swinging from year to year for your software over time. So it's real hard to put, a margin on top of that as your pricing structure. So the holy grail to pricing is really around value-based pricing. And I said before, it's easier said than done. And what we're trying to do here is create this yin-yang relationship between price and value. And this isn't a natural fit. This is something that you have to create internally or as a culture, that anytime you talk about pricing, it also has to be value-based as well. And what's interesting too is it's sometimes there's this myth that when we talk about value-based pricing, it means premium pricing, but that's not the case. I mean, for me, value-based pricing is all about, okay, well, we've got 3 different segments that value our products differently. We need to create 3 different possible offer structures that address the value and the willingness to pay of those segments. So from an offer design perspective, for me, that's what value-based pricing means. One of those opportunities might be a segment that has a really high willingness to pay, and that's where you can get your premium. So in that case, yes, the value-based pricing for the premium segment means that you could get some premium pricing, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're just trying to premium price across all your segments. It's just trying to take this mentality of, let's build a solution with a particular value that drives to a certain segment at a particular price. Even on the sales side, same thing about value-based pricing. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to go out and you're going to be premium pricing to your customers. The time and time again, I've seen some companies respond to requests for proposals or RFPs, and they go in and they say, well, we're value-based pricing and we're going to go in at a premium, and they lose the deal because they didn't read through the RFP. And some RFPs might actually say, well, we're just looking for a checklist, and if you satisfy those checklists, our decision would be based solely on price. I mean, you got to understand that they obviously, they're not premium buyers. They're very price sensitive. And so in that particular RFP, maybe you should have had a very low cost to serve offering at a low price. But that's a value-based approach, right? You're just trying to structure your offer to target a certain value at a particular price. Oh, yeah, thanks, Barbara. That was one of my, in terms of the premium pricing conversation, that's one of my favorite kind of snippets is it's not about value, premium pricing for sure. So in the product management world, especially like I'm sure there's a few folks on the call that have historically been hardware pricers, and now you've inherited software. You're trying to figure out, okay, how do I, take a different approach around pricing and offer design for software? What happens in this case, especially for hardware, there's a lot of companies that do cost-based pricing, right? You start with your product, figure out your cost, add your margin, put that in the context of your value story, and then you sell. That's what you sell out to the customer. Value-based pricing, you're flipping it. Everything's got flipped, right? So you start with your segmentation and understanding your customer first and what they value, what their requirements are, and their willingness to pay. That helps us define our value proposition. Then from that, and this is what we do in the price value analysis part, we're trying to figure out our pricing and how we link that to the value story. And then this next part is what we showed in the digital framework as well, is now we're doing our financial analysis and understanding our costing and our P&L, and that's going to be driving ultimately the final decision around whether or not we're going to be making a particular product or solution. So what I find really interesting about cost-based pricing and value-based pricing is you're actually just flipping the two worlds and going more with the value-based pricing. The other thing too, the big highlight around cost, there's this one software company and they were so focused on cost-based pricing as coming up with their pricing model. And I get it, right? It's a way to kind of, feel like you've de-risked your company to say, okay, we know for sure we're going to be making 30% margin. But what they found was there was all these hidden costs in the background. And then you had Oracle came and said, well, we're going to be increasing our pricing by 10-15%. All of a sudden their costs just went down even more because they used Oracle on the back end as part of the third party, a third party integration in their software. So that cost went up, and now they weren't making any money. And then they went and started acquiring all these other companies, and they were shocked to find out that this other company they acquired had some software solutions that were making 90-95% margin. And they were just like completely shocked because their mindset was 30% is a fair price that you should be giving to your customers. And then they go and acquire this company and realize you're making 90% margin on your software products. And it really changed the mindset around their approach for pricing. So they changed it and they said, well, let's get out of this cost-based pricing and look more towards value-based pricing. You have a heck of a lot more opportunities for breakout revenue under value-based pricing compared to cost. This next part here, I call it the digital solution value waterfall. And this is for those companies where maybe you're looking at an as a service and you're trying to integrate a variety of aspects of solution or components into your solution. As some companies will have they want to add the software with the hardware. They've got a cloud aspect solution as well. They've got premium support services, and maybe they even do some customization. But sometimes with these legacy companies that migrate from hardware to integrating all these other value add considerations as well, is they keep pricing like they did in the past. And it's shocking to me that companies will sell hardware and then they'll build a software solution and then they give the software away for free. And for me, what that says is you have a legacy sales force that doesn't know how to sell software, or the company's struggling to articulate the value of that software. So it's easier just to say, well, we'll just give that away as extra value add. We'll pick it up in terms of volume. They never do. And so what we need to do is we've got to create that value story that really talks to and articulates the value of every single one of these components. Again, the other part that I see as well is around cloud. Especially in B2B. I mean, B2B cloud, there's so many extra services that you provide in a cloud solution that the client doesn't need to take on. And you need to articulate that value in order to be able to actually monetize that component as well. So this is just kind of a visual way of saying, hey, for a company that offers software, hardware, cloud support, and a degree of customization, but they're still pricing it as, well, let's just sell the hardware, or let's just price the hardware and price the software and give everything else away for free. They're really suboptimal, right? So your software value is not getting monetized, but the actual full potential is to monetize every aspect of those components in your full solution. And it's the role of the product manager to work with marketing as close as you can to be able to articulate that value. So just as an example, there's a company out there called Workday. Some of you might actually use this in your own company, but it's an ERP system that takes on the big folks like Oracle ERP systems as well. And the Oracle system initially was an on-premise solution for many, many years, and they've migrated over. I think it's called Fusion, Oracle Fusion now, which is a bit of a single tenant kind of cloud solution. Workday from day one really disrupted the marketplace. They came out and it was all cloud from day one. They said, we're only cloud, we're not an on-premise solution. And they're really good at making sure that they sell the value of all that cloud. So a lot of other companies don't. They'll say, well, here's what we do for the ERP and whatnot, but they don't even talk about all of the activities and tasks that they do with respects to the cloud services. So I just wanted to highlight here that if you have a software solution in B2B that is on the cloud, don't undervalue that. I mean, there's huge value in that. We have an expectation in the consumer world that everything's cloud and we buy it as an app now. But in B2B, there's significant savings that you're bringing to the table with your clients because you're taking on all these activities. I mean, so Workday makes sure that they highlight this in any RFP, any pitch deck. They talk about cloud in addition to all the value that they have within their actual software offering as well. But cybersecurity is huge. I mean, your client doesn't need to worry as much about cybersecurity. You're taking care of that. You're taking care of storage. You're taking care of the upgrades, all the backups. There's significant economic value that you get with all of those activities. So let's talk about two pricing tools that we have here. The first one is what I just mentioned there, economic value analysis. And what we're doing with economic value analysis is we want to articulate the value proposition in terms of the financial benefits your client gains as a result of using your solution. And there's usually about 4 key levers that I find here. The first one is, what's your software doing for them? Is it helping your client drive revenue growth? Is it helping them with cost savings? Maybe cost avoidance, especially for companies that are scaling aggressively. Maybe your software is going to help them, avoid a lot of those scaling costs. The third one is mitigation of risk. And so just imagine the CEO is a decision maker and someone's trying to pitch them a software. We need to buy this software. It's going to cost us $300,000 a year. Usually this is what the CEO is going to ask. How's it going to help me grow our revenue, cost savings, cost avoidance, or how's it going to help us mitigate risk? And so have that story ready for them. Back it up with case studies, back it up with as much documentation that you possibly have, or even customer testimonials. I mean, if this is going to be a decision driver from the CEO to say whether or not they're going to buy your software, you need to get in front of it and make sure that you've got that economic story in place. So I really like this one. It links the price conversation directly to their financial benefits. Again, it's a 2,000 foot view level. I find this is really good for new product initiatives that you might be having, especially AI. I mean, some of you might be coming up with AI solutions and there's not a lot of competition. It's so new, it's so innovative in the marketplace. And when teams come and ask me and they say, well, we've got this great solution, this AI solution, but we have no idea how to price it. Should we do it at $10,000, $100,000, $1 million? This is the first exercise I'll go through the team, is to say, well, tell me how it's driving economic value to the client. And then we can price in the context of that economic value. Okay, so again, I mentioned that it's music to the executive's ears. A con, as you'll notice though, is it neglects competition, right? So if you do have a lot of competition in this space, that's our next tool that we'll talk about briefly as well. So my approach to this, it's really threefold. Is what's your software doing for your client? Like, what are those key performance indicators that you're changing for the client? The second part is to understand those key KPIs on the client side, and how's it changing? What's their current KPIs? What's that KPI going to go to as a result of them using your software? And then translate that into a financial dollar benefit. And then the third part here is price relative to that economic value. And so here's an example, right? And so just imagine this is your sales conversation with the customer. You say, hey, the annual savings that we agreed on that you can obtain from using our product is $2.5 million per year. At our price of $375,000 per year for your software, you're going to receive an 85% discount of the worth of the product to you. So your only pricing is 15% of that economic value that they're going to be receiving for your product. And that's it. I mean, that's the trick to economic value. What are your financial benefits you get from using our software? And here's our price. And your price is in the context of that economic value. Here's another one, and this is an example of how do you integrate a KPI into this conversation. So let's say you have a case where you say our software, it's going to help you lower your customer acquisition costs from $250 to $170 per customer. For 4,000 new customers each year, that's going to be $320,000 in total savings. At our price of $49,000 per year, you're getting 85% discount off the product to you. So this is a little bit a deeper dive in terms of the economic value, because we're actually highlighting the KPI. And there was this one scenario, and it's really funny. I was working with this one organization, and one of the folks on the product team came from the client side, and we kind of talked a little bit about economic value. And they said, well, it's funny because and on the client side, he was the one that made the decision to buy the software, and then eventually thought, the software is so good, I'm going to join with that software company. But his comment was, this is where you got me. You had a 20-page pitch deck, but as soon as you talked to my key performance indicator, that was one of my strategic objectives for the year, was to do this, lower my customer cost of acquisition down. You came in with a solution, you talked directly to that key performance indicator, and I was ready to pay a certain amount to get that. But then they came in and they did cost plus pricing, and he laughed and he said, you were about 1/10 of what I was about to pay for your software. And so of course it was a no-brainer, and he bought the software. But that, I just thought it was a funny story, but it all came down to the economic value. But it also highlighted that they really missed an opportunity to do pricing in the context of that economic value. So again, I find this is really useful for some great innovation. Artificial intelligence, if this is a big part of your team, what your team's working on, whether it's the full software solution or it's a module add-on, I almost always suggest go through this exercise for economic value. It's the best starting point way to price artificial intelligence. So that brings us to the next one, where this is step 2 for me, or another toolkit that I use for price value analysis. And it really integrates the considerations around competition or even next best alternatives. And so price value analysis, and some of you might be familiar with this, just really high level. If you've responded to any RFPs and you go through a scoring process of how you get scored versus competitors, this is pretty much replicating that selection process or the scorecard approach that some of your clients might use to really understand the value that you bring to the table relative to what's in the market. And so price value analysis is that tool that provides directional understanding about how customers perceive your offering from both a pricing and a value perspective. And it compares you and your offering versus next best alternatives in the market. And so I really like this one because it helps understand the buying decision process from your client side. It also understands the degree of price sensitivity across various segments. And so what is that degree of importance between price and value? And this is a big question mark sometimes in B2B. And what I find, if you're bringing an innovative solution with a lot of your customers, typically in B2B, 30% of a decision is based on price, anywhere between 20 to 30%. And then about 70 to 80% is based on value. And this is the big benefit about the digital era and innovation. It's bringing so much new innovation that has such impact that you're now seeing this booming of value-based buyers versus, 15, 20 years ago, there's a lot more kind of, budget or pricing-based buyers as well. So that's what I find, but not to say that every customer is going to be buying that way. Sales teams will tell you that it's 100% price, but this is where you need to do your research and due diligence to understand different segments in your marketplace. Some segments might be very price sensitive. They just want an MVP, right? Just get me up and running. That's all I care about. And I have no budget. But, for more innovative solutions, maybe they are doing that, the willingness to do a 30% based on price and 70% on value. So this tool is also really good too, because it's really valuable for product teams to understand what's driving the buying decision process, what's important to them, where do we need to invest in on a value side. Every software product person gets caught up in the laundry list of thousands of features that we could possibly work on. And so we're going to spend the next 3 years going through our checklist of each of those features. But what this model does is it helps you focus, and it says, hey, 30 or 40% of their buying decision process is going to be based on this category here. So we need to invest in that to make sure that that's as high as possible in terms of our value with that segment. So it's a great a tool to do some price modeling or what if price modeling, and a great tool to do some value-based modeling as well. Okay, so in terms of the approach, what we're trying to do is we're trying to quantify value, right? I mentioned before, value-based pricing, easier said than done. What we're trying to do here is we're trying to quantify value as our starting point. And so I'll show an example on the next slide here. We're going to go through and list the buying criteria from the customers. Some of those are going to be more important than others. You go through a scoring process. How do you score on a scale of 1 to 10 versus your competitors in each of those categories? Then it's a matter of looking at the price or the perceived price in the marketplace. Sometimes you can look at an actual price list. There's a whole different webinar based on competitive price analysis. But you need an aspect to really kind of understand your price positioning in the marketplace. Then we're going to look at the trade-off between price and value. And that's that, 30% price, 70% value. And then what we can do is model increases, and you can play with your pricing, you can play with your value, and figure out what your price value positioning should be. So I use this tool all the time. And if your team gets involved with deals and RFPs, I mean, this has to be a must in terms of, kind of a integration, integrate this tool within your process. Anytime before you respond to an RFP, role play, do this. I mean, it's going to help you really kind of plan strategically as to how you want to respond to certain RFPs. So here's a snapshot, and we're almost done here. I know we're coming up to the hour. It's just a snapshot of 4 companies that were competing against each other for a bid. One of them actually protested this bid, so that's why we were able to get all of the scores through each of the companies, and it really kind of gave an insight into how that particular customer or even segment purchased products. So there's 4 companies, A, B, C, D. The one that won was the one with the highest price. So they won at $2.45 million. So you'd almost kind of scratch your head and think, well, you got to go as low as possible to win every bid. This is why it's important to understand that particular customer. What's their decision based on price and value? This one was very clear. 20% of their price was going to be based on, 20% of their decision was based on price, 80% on value. This is a value-based pricing, value-based buyer. So in this case, there's an opportunity to premium price if you feel like your product is the outstanding product in the marketplace. So it's really interesting here. You got these 4 companies. You can see a wide range of different prices that they were providing here over the term of the contract length. So all the way from 943,000 all the up to the 2.45. A software company A protested the bid. They thought they should have won the bid. But you can see overall in terms of value, I mean, company A only had good value, whereas it was obviously felt that company D was the one that was hitting it out of the park. They were outstanding. So in terms of the quantified price and value scores, based on this mix, you can see that company D had the highest quantified total price value score. So again, what we're trying to do here is just figure out, what's the best way to come up with the value scores. And here's the value score, how that value score of 69.9 came into play. And so it's that process I mentioned on the last slide. What are the buying criteria that's important to the customer? What's the weighting of importance for each of those? So some more than others. And then it's a matter of going through an exercise to really understand, how you compare relative to other alternatives in the marketplace as well. So for many teams, the question is, well, how do you get these scores, right? Like this one, we were able to get because it was an actual bid and somebody protested and you can figure out the scoring. The approach that I take is start with your own internal team. And it's really interesting to get your product team's perspective in terms of how you sit with what you feel is key decision criteria that's going to drive buying decisions. So go through your product team, but then it's interesting to go through, do the same exercise with your marketing team, with your sales team, and just see how each team feels that they're driving some where they're driving value and what's the decision criteria for your customers. Usually it's not aligned. And usually that misalignment means that not everybody's on the same page about your value story. That's the first starting point. The next starting point, of course, is to go to your customers. And market research or customer research is a great way. I've actually seen some, templates to say, well, what's your top 5 buying criteria? And what's the weighting of importance for each one of those? Hey, let's go through our product. You're familiar with our product. Are you familiar with some other competitive products? How would you feel we score relative to them on a scale of 1 to 10? So market research or customer research is a great way to kind of bring this information back as well. So usually I say start with your own team, expand it out to other groups within your company, marketing and sales, see what they're at, and then ultimately go to your customers as well and really try to understand how they perceive your value and offering. And so once you've got this in place, I mentioned that you can do some what if modeling, right? Use this as a bit of a gameplay rate card. You can figure out then and play with your pricing up here and say, well, let's say you were company A. How low did they need to go then in order to win that deal? And so you can kind of see, okay, well, if we need to get, let's say 6.7 or 6.8, we know that company D is the best in the marketplace. Is 1.53 good enough, or do we have to lower a price for this particular customer, or maybe even for this particular segment that we're looking at? Hey, we're only, considered to be good in the marketplace. Where do we need to invest going forward? I mentioned you could have a laundry list of 1,000 features, but if you have something like this, you can focus, right, and figure out, okay, well, where do we need to put all of our resources to really kind of, increase that value for what's really driving the decision. And so let's take a quick look. Company A, they could have done their overall solution, could have scored better. And so they need to drill down more into the score of a 4.3 and say, well, what do we need to do to make that solution even more? So they're going to have to do a little bit more digging to figure out it's precisely what that is compared to software company D, and make sure that going forward, they need to do what they have to do to bring that up to a 6. So 2 great tools, economic value analysis, price value analysis, and the price trade-off analysis tool as well. I find are great tools that I usually start off with respects to trying to understand how to price your product and offerings. And that's it. I think I'm about 3 minutes over, so I know that we got a bit of a late start here, but we went through digital trends, we introduced the digital pricing framework, and we also went through 2 examples around some pricing tools that you can use with your own company. And hopefully these tools kind of make you think differently, and it's something that you can take back to your own organization and kick off a couple internal discussions as well. So feel free to, when we send out the presentation as well, there's a variety of different resources and materials that's available out there. I've got some white papers that are published specifically around B2B software and software-enabled systems. There's 3 books as well. If you sell to government, there's a great pricing book out there, Business to Government Pricing, and 2 new books that were recently published this past year. And of course, we've got the ISPMA, which is a great resource for some new learnings and webinars as well. So I'll stop there. I hope there was some great new valuable information out there. I see there's a couple comments in the chat. Maybe I'll just bring that up. But if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask away.
Yes, thank you, Scott, a lot for your presentation. Really great presentation, and I hope that we will have quite a lot of questions here. So you already mentioned that we have one question from Austin already from in the chat, and yeah, probably we can start with the question from the chat. Do you want me to read the question for you, or you will take a look and answer by yourself?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I got it up here. Yeah, so Austin, thanks for the question there. It said, I guess this was for the example, the price value trade-off. Did they reveal that 20% of the decision was price, or was that back solved based on the final decision? In this case, they knew up front, and it's really surprising how often even with requests for proposals where they provide that information up front as well. And I find with especially government-based RFPs, they're a lot more transparent around that. And if they're not transparent, or let's say you're selling to a commercial or corporate-based client, these are the questions that you should have in your sales. If you're getting assessed, that could be a question in the sales discovery process as well. Is, hey, for your final decision, I mean, what percent of your decision is going to be based on price, and what's your decision around value? Are you looking just for an MVP product at the bare bones budget, or are you looking for something that's really going to bring value to the table? So that's another way. And the other way you can get that percent too is just doing some good market research and trying to figure out, well, for certain, if you've got 3 key target segments, really trying to understand, what is that decision based on price versus value. So short answer is yes, they provided that up front. There's another term out there. I think it's called a technically price. I forget. It's something like TPMA. Anyways, for the U.S. government, they actually classify their RFPs in 2 categories. One they actually call a value-based trade-off bid, and the other one they call I think it's just a technically accepted bid, which means if you just get the check marks, we just have some requirements. If you check all the boxes, 100% of our decisions based on price. And it's surprising how many companies go into those type of bids and they go as a premium pricer. Like I said before, value-based pricing doesn't mean premium pricing. You got to know that RFP, they specifically said, if you qualify for the bid, it's all price. So that's why it's important just to really understand that trade-off between price and value. Okay, so we have a couple other questions here. What if the value varies for each client in the same segment based on their present practices? How do we price? What if the value varies for each client base? Yeah, so what I find, maybe you have sub-segments within a segment. And so maybe you do need to go through an exercise to say, well, here's our target segment, but there's actually 3 types of customers. And, one exercise I usually go through is go through an exercise of use cases, really understand the requirements and use cases of each of those sub-segments as well. So sometimes it might not be about price, but it might be an indicator that, hey, this sub-segment in our main target segment, they only really need a couple key features. This one uses our product differently as well, and maybe they need like 50% of our features. This sub-segment over here, their use case is that they're a power user. They use like 80% of our key features as well. So from a price perspective, you could sell them the Cadillac and just drop your price to this one sub-segment and have a mid price for the other and a premium price. But what you can do from a product perspective is say, well, can we package it differently? Maybe what we need is for this very price sensitive sub-segment, we need to have a very low cost to serve offering that just meets those specific requirements as well. So I guess to answer your question here, if the value varies within the same segment, that might be a bit of an indicator that you've got some sub segments at play, and just dig a little bit deeper and not just think about price, but also think about packaging as well to address that. So we've got any specific advice for startups? Great question, for sure. This digital pricing framework is key for startups. What I find with a lot of startups is there's so much eagerness to build. It's almost like build the product and we'll figure out how to price it later. If you go through this framework and you start off trying to understand your value proposition, how you're going to articulate it in the marketplace, how you're going to price that product and package it correctly in the marketplace, that's going to set the stage in a lot of cases for how you're going to design your product as well. If you've got, let's say, 3 to 5 different packages that you want, then all of a sudden your software design is going to cater to that, that way to do it. Too often than not, I've seen startups just build the product first, and then they try to figure out how to price and package it. And they're like, oh, you know what? If we had just thought about this beforehand, we could have repurposed it or redesigned it so that we can monetize and make more money off of this offering as well. So start first with the pricing and offer design before you start building everything on the back end. The other thing for B2B startups is if you've got no clients, it's the beta customers versus your full commercial offering. And so think to yourself, okay, well, let's have some beta pricing strategies that is different from how we want to have our full commercial pricing. Sometimes for startups, they'll say, well, here's our commercial price list. Let's go out and sell. But I just find key is you got to start getting users on your platform ASAP. So that's why beta programs are really good. And what I mean by a beta program from a price perspective is maybe you give a significant discount. I saw one company, they were giving about 80–90% discounts to bring some beta customers on. Even if it's a new module, even if you have a legacy client base, you're coming up with some new modules, just make sure that you're getting users on it, initial users. So for the startups, think about that. Have a beta pricing program in place, but separate that from, at some point, you got to flip the switch and say, okay, well, here's our official commercial offer structure and pricing for, once you get that user base up and running. So great question. I think even startups, what's interesting is keep an eye out. ISPMA is going to be having a special program that's going to specifically target startups as well. I'm excited about it. So it's in progress as we speak, and I think there should be an interesting tie-in with pricing strategies for startups as well. Okay. Any other questions? And if you have follow-up questions, email me directly as well. I'll put my contact info up here. So yeah, just feel free to send me an email. Scott@miller-advisors.com. We're great to keep in touch. I'm all about the community and happy to provide some guidance if you have any questions. I think I saw one more question here. Once you have the 2,000-foot view and understand the range price should be in, what's the way to choose the optimum price? Get down to the 500-foot level, which is not way above, under, and doesn't leave money on the table. Yeah, great question. It's that 2,000-foot view. For me, it's like, hey, we should be in this range. To really fine tune it for me is understanding which segments should fit into each kind of component. And then again, the way you package it, you might have different requirements from different customers. And so if you package it a certain way, maybe some components for requirements, you want to have it as an add-on price and whatnot. That's where kind of like, your price can go up a little bit based on how you package and price it. And maybe you have modules, for example, versus others, maybe your price kind of goes down a little bit, but you're still kind of selling within a larger band that you get from your price value analysis. So to bring it to the kind of that sweet spot at a client level, it really comes down to how you structure that commercial offer. Like, what's your packaging look like? What's the metrics you're going to use that can scale from one client to the next as well? That's a separate. I didn't have enough time for this webinar to go into that detail, but that's how you get to that 500-foot level as well. So thanks, Harvinder, for that question. Great. So thanks everybody for taking time out of your day. And I hope that you felt that this was a valuable exercise. My goal here is just to plant the seed around some best practices and give a couple case examples. So I hope there's actually something that you can take back to your own team just start thinking differently about, we work hard every day to build these products. So let's make sure that we make money building these products as well.
Yeah, thank you, Scott, a lot. So regarding the question about the recordings, so yes, for sure, the recordings will be available tomorrow on the SPM Summit website. So same page where you registered for this webinar. So on the same page, you will see the recording. And I should also remind you that this is actually not the first presentation, not the first webinar Scott give us as a part of the SPM Summit Online Recharge. So almost like 1.5 years when the pandemic situation started. So we already had a webinar with Scott on slightly different topic, and the recording is also available on the website. So please press the past event button and you will see all our past events, including the webinar with Scott, like that we had 2 years ago, something like that. So thank you everyone for attending this webinar, and sorry once again for some technical issues we had in the beginning. So we were happy to have you here, and please note that in just a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, we will have a really great event, SPM Summit Europe 2022, where Scott will also give a presentation on slightly different topics, still extremely relevant. And again, it will have a lot, it will be about pricing.
Great. Okay, thanks again, everybody, for attending, and enjoy the rest of your day.